Only I can see you naked, Millionaire tells wife who was sleeping with another man. Richard Allen Sampson was a name that resonated through all the corridors of the American hospitality sector. At 42, he commanded Empire Hotels, one of the country's largest chains, with units spread from Boston to Seattle, passing through strategic points in Miami, New Orleans, and, of course, New York City, where the company's headquarters were located in the heart of Fifth Avenue. His face graced the covers of business magazines, his opinion was quoted in economic editorials, and his presence at corporate events had the power to elevate the prestige of any gathering. He was the kind of man who had learned from a very young age to transform charm into a business tool. The son of a businessman from rural Pennsylvania who started with a small inn in Gettysburg, Richard grew up watching his father negotiate, expand, conquer. But it was he who took the business to another level. Graduating in administration from Harvard Business School with an MBA in London, he had returned to the United States determined to build an empire. And he succeeded. With audacious mergers, calculated acquisitions, and an impressive ability to convince investors, he transformed the modest family chain into a national powerhouse. But it wasn't just in business that Richard knew how to win. His personal life also seemed to follow an impeccable script. Tall, with light eyes and an easy smile, he collected admirers. Relationships came and went with the same fluidity with which he closed contracts. Nothing lasted long. Nothing demanded much. He controlled everything, including his emotions, or at least he believed he did. On that Thursday morning, the New York City sky was overcast, as if the entire city sensed that something was about to change. Richard arrived at the office at 8 sharp as usual. The meeting room on the 23rd floor was already prepared. Fresh coffee, ice water, organized folders on the glass table. He adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, ran a hand through his hair, and entered with the posture of someone who knows they command the room. That morning's meeting was important. A group of international investors, represented by a fund based in Switzerland, showed interest in acquiring a stake in Empire Hotels. It wasn't the first time Richard had received such proposals, but this one seemed different. The investors sent a strategic consultant to evaluate the company before any decision. And it was she who entered the meeting room at that moment, carrying a brown leather folder and a look that showed no intention of impressing. Marina Collins. That was her name. Richard read it on the badge she wore clipped to her discreet unbranded grey blazer. She didn't wear high heels, she didn't have flashy makeup. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun. She seemed to be between 35 and 40, but it was hard to tell. There was something about her that defied quick classifications. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but she had a solid presence, a firmness in her gaze that made anyone pay attention. Richard extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Marina. Richard Sampson. Welcome to Empire Hotels." She shook his hand firmly, but without exaggeration. She looked into his eyes for a second, just enough to establish that she would not be intimidated. "Thank you. Let's begin." Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight Richard wasn't used to hearing. There was no reverence, no enchantment. It was as if she was there to do a job and nothing more. He felt something strange, a hint of irritation, and at the same time an unexpected curiosity. The meeting began. Marina opened her folder and pulled out a series of documents, graphs, spreadsheets, reports. She knew Empire Hotels better than many executives who had worked there for years. She spoke with surgical precision about occupancy rates, profit margins, debt, growth projections. And then, when Richard began to present the company's expansion plans, she interrupted him. "With all due respect, Mr. Sampson, these numbers are not sustainable." Richard stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her. No one interrupted him in meetings. No one questioned his projections that way. He smiled, trying to maintain his composure. "What do you mean, not sustainable?" Marina turned one of the spreadsheets towards him. "The profit margin you present here assumes an 85% occupancy rate in the new units. But the industry average over the last 3 years, especially in metropolitan areas outside the New York-Miami corridor, doesn't exceed 70%. You are overestimating demand, and that puts the project at risk." Richard felt his blood rise, not from anger but from something he couldn't name. She was right. He knew it. But no one, until that moment, had had the courage to tell him to his face. The other executives in the room remained silent, waiting for the boss's reaction. He took a deep breath, and then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "You're right. The projection was too optimistic. We'll revise it." Marina didn't smile back. She just nodded, as if acknowledging an obvious fact, and continued her analysis. Richard spent the rest of the meeting observing her. Every gesture, every word, every pause. She didn't try to please. She didn't seek approval. She simply did her job. And she did. Well, when the meeting ended, it was past 11 in the morning. The other executives left quickly, relieved to have escaped an awkward situation. Marina put her documents back in her folder and stood up. Richard went over to her. "I appreciate your sincerity." She stared at him unhurriedly. "Sincerity is not optional in my job, Mr. Sampson. It's the minimum." He chuckled, more to himself than to her. "You can call me Richard." Marina didn't respond. She just nodded slightly and began to walk towards the door. Richard accompanied her to the hallway. "How long will you be?" "In New York City?" 3 weeks, maybe 4, depends on what I find." "Find?" She stopped and looked at him directly. "Inconsistencies, weaknesses, structural problems that could compromise the investment." Richard crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "Do you think you'll find many problems?" Marina didn't blink. "I always do." And then she left, without saying goodbye, without looking back. Richard stood there alone in the hallway, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. Unease. In the following days, Marina settled into a reserved office on the 19th floor. She spent hours analyzing reports, interviewing employees, visiting units of the chain, always discreet, always attentive, always jotting everything down in a black-covered notebook that never left her side. Richard tried more than once to find reasons to talk to her. He offered help. He suggested lunches, but Marina declined with cold politeness. She was there to work, nothing more. Richard couldn't get that woman out of his head. It wasn't physical attraction, at least not just that. It was something else. The way she ignored him, the way she treated his charm with indifference. For the first time in a long time, he had no control over a situation, and that fascinated him and frustrated him. A week after their first meeting, Marina asked to speak with him privately. Richard received her in his office, a large room with a view of Fifth Avenue. She entered, closed the door, and went straight to the point. "I found something that needs to be discussed." Richard indicated the armchair in front of his desk. She sat, but maintained an upright posture. She placed a folder on the desk. "There is an expansion project being led by the Operations Directorate. It's called the Coastal Project. 10 new hotels on the southeast coast. An initial investment of $120 million. "Yes, I know it. It's one of our main plans for the next 2 years." Marina opened the folder and showed a series of documents. "Then you must also know that half of the environmental licenses required for these constructions have not yet been approved, and that 3 of the acquired plots have pending legal disputes, and that the economic feasibility study presented to investors omits these details." Richard remained silent. He picked up the documents and began to read. He felt the pressure building in his chest. He knew the Coastal Project, but he didn't know about those problems, or at least not with that clarity. "Who gave you this information?" "I investigated. It's part of my job." Richard looked up from the papers and stared at her. "Are you suggesting that someone in my company is sabotaging the project?" Marina didn't avert her gaze. "I'm saying someone is hiding information. Whether it's sabotage or incompetence, I don't know yet. But this needs to be resolved before any investment is made." Richard dropped the documents on the table. He ran a hand over his face. He felt a mixture of anger and admiration. Anger at discovering such serious flaws under his command. Admiration because that woman, in just 1 week, had discovered what no one else had managed to. "What do you suggest?" Marina closed the folder. "Suspend the Coastal Project until all legal issues are resolved, and open an internal audit to identify who is behind these omissions." Richard took a deep breath. Suspending the project meant delaying plans, disappointing shareholders, admitting failures publicly. But he knew she was right. Again. "All right, I'll do it." Marina stood up. "Excellent. I'll prepare a complete report." She was almost at the door when Richard called her. "Marina." She stopped and looked back. "Thank you, truly." She hesitated for a second, and then, for the first time, she showed something that could be interpreted as an almost smile. "It's my job." And she left. Richard stood alone in his office, looking out the window at the city that seemed to pulse below. The chaotic traffic of Fifth Avenue, people rushing back and forth, and he there, feeling that something inside him was changing. It wasn't just the project, it wasn't just the company, it was something deeper, more disturbing, more real. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stayed in his penthouse in the Upper East Side, looking at the New York City skyline. He thought about Marina, the way she entered a room and changed the energy of the environment, the way she didn't need validation, the silent strength she carried, and he realized, with a mixture of astonishment and vulnerability, that he was starting to care about her opinion, about what she thought, about what she felt, and that was new, frighteningly new. The next morning, a Friday, Richard arrived at the office determined to resolve the coastal project situation. He called an emergency meeting with the board. Marina was invited to participate. She presented her findings with the same technical coldness as always. The directors were uncomfortable. Some tried to justify themselves, others remained silent. Richard listened to everything, and then he made a decision. "The coastal project is suspended until further notice. I want a complete audit, and I want to know who authorized the presentation of this incomplete data to investors." The operations director, a man in his 50s named Claude, tried to argue. "Richard, this will delay everything. We'll lose market opportunities. Competitors will advance." Richard, cut him off. "I'd rather delay than build on lies. The meeting is adjourned." Everyone left except Marina. She stayed, organizing her papers. Richard approached her. "You must be satisfied." Marina looked at him, not understanding. "Satisfied? For having exposed the problems, for having proved you were right." She closed her folder and stared at him. "I don't do this for personal satisfaction, Richard. I do it because it's the right thing to do." He smiled. "You're incapable of lying, aren't you?" Marina didn't smile back. "Lying wastes time, and I don't like to waste time." Richard took a step forward. "Then tell me something. What do you really think of me?" Marina was silent for a moment. She seemed to be evaluating whether or not to answer. Finally she spoke. "I think you're a man accustomed to winning, but who never learned to lose, and that makes you dangerous, to yourself and to those around you." The words fell like stones. Richard felt the impact. It wasn't anger. It was truth. And he knew it. "You always say what you think?" "Always." "Even if it hurts?" "Especially if it hurts. The truth that doesn't hurt transforms no one." Richard chuckled, but it was a humorless laugh, a laugh of someone who had just been completely disarmed. "You're unique, Marina." She picked up her folder and walked to the door. She stopped before leaving and, without looking back, said, "And you're predictable, Richard, but you're starting to change. I just don't know if it's for the better or for the worse." And she left. Richard stood there, alone in the empty meeting room, feeling the ground beneath his feet shifting. For the first time in many years he was unsure of anything, not of himself, not of the future, not of what he was feeling. And for the first time it didn't scare him as much as it should have. In the following days, the company's routine changed. The audit was initiated. The coastal project was frozen. Shareholders were informed. There was resistance. There was criticism. But Richard stood firm, and Marina continued working, relentless, methodical, always one step ahead. Richard began to look for reasons to be near her. He offered coffee, suggested document revisions, invented doubts about reports. Marina noticed but said nothing. She just kept doing her job. Until, On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, while they were reviewing a contract together in the meeting room, she stopped writing and looked at him. "Why do you do that?" Richard pretended not to understand. "Do what?" "Invent excuses to be near me." He was speechless. For the first time, he was caught off guard. Marina continued, "You don't need that, Richard. You don't need games. If you want to talk to me, just talk. If you want to get to know me better, just ask. But stop pretending." Richard felt his face flush, not from shame, but from something he couldn't name. Vulnerability, perhaps. "You're right. I'm sorry." Marina went back to writing in her notebook. "You don't need to apologize, just be honest." Richard remained silent, and then, with a sincerity that surprised even himself, he spoke. "I want to get to know you better. I don't know why, but I do." Marina stopped writing. She looked at him, and for the second time since they met, she almost smiled. "All right, but on my time and my way." Richard nodded. "Your way." And so it began, slowly, cautiously, an approximation. It wasn't passion. It wasn't a movie romance. It was something more subtle, more complex, more real. Short conversations in the hallway, quick lunches in discreet restaurants near the office, discussions about work that, little by little, turned into conversations about life, dreams, fears. Richard discovered that Marina was from Portland, that she had studied industrial engineering at the University of Oregon, that she had worked for major consulting firms before becoming independent, but she never spoke about her past in depth. Always deflected, always changed the subject, and Richard respected that, because he himself had secrets he didn't share. What he didn't know was that Marina was also fighting against something she hadn't planned, against a feeling that shouldn't exist, because she wasn't just there to audit the company. She was there to protect something that Richard, unknowingly, had almost destroyed years ago. But that was still a secret. And secrets, as Marina well knew, have the power to change everything when they come to light. The rain continued to fall outside. And New York City, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding in its glass buildings, continued to pulse. Chaotic, intense, relentless. The following weeks brought a subtle yet undeniable change in the dynamic between Richard and Marina. What began as a strictly professional relationship gradually took on more complex layers. He remained the charismatic executive, accustomed to leading with confidence. She remained the methodical consultant, focused on results. But there was something new in the air, a tension that wasn't exactly uncomfortable. It was unsettling. It was magnetic. Richard noticed that Marina had a habit of arriving at the office always before 7 in the morning. The city was still waking up, Fifth Avenue traffic was lighter, and she took advantage of that silence to work without interruptions. He started arriving earlier too, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to be there when she arrived. He wanted to be the first person she saw walking through the door. At first, she would just nod and head to her office, but over time she would stop to have coffee with him in the floor's pantry. These were short conversations, about the weather, about the traffic, about the city, nothing deep. But for Richard, those 15 minutes were worth more than hours of meetings. One day, while preparing coffee, Marina commented, almost without thinking, "New York City reminds me of Portland in a way. Both are cities that never stop, that don't forgive. Those who stand still." Richard, stirring sugar into his cup, looked at her. "Do you like that pace?" Marina shrugged. "I got used to it. When you grow up in a smaller city, you learn to value calm. But when you move to a place like this, you learn that calm can be dangerous. It makes you forget that the world doesn't wait for you." Richard noticed a melancholy in her voice, something she didn't usually let show. "Do you miss Portland?" Marina took a sip of her coffee. "I miss the person I was there, but I don't know if I want to be her again." She didn't explain further, and Richard didn't ask, but that sentence stayed with him. The rest of the day, all night long. He couldn't stop thinking about what Marina had left behind. and what had transformed her into the woman who stood before him now. The internal audit revealed, as Marina had predicted, a series of irregularities in the coastal project. It wasn't exactly sabotage, but a combination of negligence, pressure for results, and lack of adequate supervision. The operations director, Claude, was removed. Other executives received formal warnings. Richard publicly took responsibility, which generated headlines in business newspapers. But surprisingly, his honesty was well received. Investors praised the transparency. Shareholders felt more secure. And Empire Hotels, despite the delay in plans, emerged stronger. Marina was discreet about her role in all of this. She didn't give interviews. She didn't seek public credit. But Richard knew, and made a point of acknowledging in a meeting with the board that the company owed her a great deal. After that meeting, Marina sought him out in his office. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Give me public credit. It's not part of my contract." Richard got up from his chair and went to the window. "I know, but it was the right thing to do." Marina remained silent for a moment. "You're changing, Richard." He turned to her. "Is that good or bad?" Marina almost smiled. "I don't know yet." It was at that moment that Richard realized something he had been avoiding admitting. He didn't just want to impress Marina. He didn't just want to win her over. He wanted her to stay. He wanted that presence, that firmness, that brutal truth not to disappear from his life. But he said, "Nothing. Not yet." 2 weeks later, Marina informed him that she needed to travel to Charleston. One of Empire Hotel's units on the southeast coast was experiencing operational problems that could compromise the investor's final evaluation. She needed to go personally to understand the situation. Richard, without much thought, offered to accompany her. "It's not necessary. I can handle it alone." "I know you can, but I need to see with my own eyes what's happening there. I'm the CEO, it's part of my responsibility." Marina looked at him, suspicious. "Are you sure that's all it is?" Richard smiled. "You want honesty, so here it is. I want to go because I want to spend more time with you, but I also want to go because, in fact, I need to understand what's wrong. Both things are true." Marina sighed, and then, to Richard's surprise, she agreed. "All right, but we're going to work. It's not a pleasure trip." He raised his hands in surrender. "I promise." The trip was scheduled for the following week. They would take a flight on Monday morning and return on Wednesday. 2 days. But for Richard, it felt like an eternity, and also felt like nothing. The flight to Charleston was smooth. Marina spent most of the time reviewing documents, making notes, preparing for meetings. Richard tried to strike up a conversation a few times, but she was focused. He had learned in those weeks that when Marina was in work mode, it was useless to try to distract her. So he just observed the way she frowned when reading something that didn't make sense, the way she lightly bit her lip when she was concentrated, the small gestures that revealed an intensity she tried to hide. When they arrived at the chain's hotel on Isle of Palms, it was already noon. The local manager greeted them with obvious nervousness. Marina went straight to the point. "I want to see the occupancy records for the last 6 months, and I need to speak with the cleaning, reception, and maintenance teams, separately." The manager blinked, surprised. "Separately?" "Yes, and without prior notice. I want to talk to the people who really know what's going on here." Richard was impressed once again by her approach. While he would have held a formal meeting with the managers, Marina went straight to the source, to the people on the front lines. And it was there that she found the truth. The employees, when they realized that Marina wasn't there to punish them but to listen, began to speak. They talked about the absurd pressure to maintain inflated occupancy rates, about rooms being registered as occupied when they were empty, about fake reviews being posted on booking sites, about the manager threatening to fire anyone who didn't cooperate. Marina wrote everything down. Richard, who accompanied the conversations, felt a mixture of anger and shame. Anger at what was happening under his command, shame for not having noticed it sooner. That night, after a full day of interviews and analyses, Marina and Richard had dinner at a beachfront restaurant. The sound of the waves was constant. The breeze carried the smell of salt and sea. Marina seemed tired. Richard too. "Do you always work like this?" Marina looked at him. "Like what?" "With this intensity, this focus." She shrugged. "I don't know how to work any other way." Richard took a sip of water. "It's not just work, Marina. It's more than that. You have a mission, as if you're proving something to someone or to yourself." Marina fell silent. For a long moment it seemed she wouldn't answer. But then, in a lower, more vulnerable voice, she said, "Maybe I am." "Proving what?" "That I can rebuild, that I can get it right, that I'm not what they tried to make me believe I was." Richard felt his chest tighten. There was pain in those words, an old pain, deep. "What happened to you, Marina?" She averted her gaze to the sea. "Everyone has a past, Richard. Mine is no different." "But it's painful." She didn't answer. She just kept looking at the horizon where the sky met the ocean, tinged orange by the sunset. Richard realized there was a line he couldn't cross, not yet, but he wanted to. He wanted to know every piece of that woman, every scar, every secret. The next morning, Marina confronted the hotel manager. She presented the evidence, the inconsistencies, the lies. He tried to justify himself, but she gave him no room. Richard, beside her, supported every word. The manager was fired. New leadership was put in place, and the unit was placed under direct supervision from the New York City headquarters. When they returned to the hotel where they were staying, it was already night. They had reserved separate rooms, of course, but upon reaching the hallway, Richard stopped in front of Marina's door. "Thank you." She turned to him. "For what?" "For showing me how things should be done, for not being afraid to tell the truth." Marina smiled. It was a small but genuine smile. "You're learning, Richard." He took a step forward. He was too close. He could smell the subtle perfume she wore, something discreet, floral. "I want to keep learning. With you." Marina looked into his eyes. For a second it seemed she was going to say something, but she didn't. She just opened her room door and went inside. Before closing it, she looked at him once more. "Good night, Richard." And she closed the door. Richard stood there, alone in the empty hallway, feeling his heart beat faster than it should. He went back to his own room but couldn't sleep. He lay looking at the ceiling, thinking about everything and nothing at the same time. The next day, they returned to New York City. The flight was crowded. Marina once again spent her time working. But this time Richard noticed something different. Every now and then she would look at him, quickly, as if checking if he was still there. And when their eyes met, she didn't immediately look away. She lingered, for a second, two, and then went back to her documents. In the following weeks, their trips became more frequent. New Orleans, Denver, Boston. There was always something to check. There was always a unit with problems, and Marina always insisted on going personally. Richard accompanied her whenever he could, and, little by little, those moments became more than work. They became a refuge. It was in Denver, on a night of light rain, that something definitively changed. They were in a small boutique hotel in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, a discreet, elegant place, away from the hustle and bustle of downtown. They had spent the entire day visiting Empire Hotel's unit in Lodo and, upon returning, were exhausted. Marina went up to her room, Richard to his. But half an hour later, she knocked on his door. When Richard opened it, he saw that her hair was loose, one of the few times he had seen her like that. She was wearing a simple sweatshirt and pajama bottoms. She looked younger, lighter. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't sleep, and I thought maybe you couldn't either." Richard smiled. "You thought right." They went down to the hotel lounge. It was empty, only the soft light of lamps and the low sound of instrumental music in the background. They ordered tea. They sat in comfortable armchairs facing each other. Marina began to speak. About Portland, about her family, about her childhood, things she had never shared. Richard listened to everything, fascinated. And then he also began to tell his story, about Pennsylvania, about his father, about the pressure of having to prove he was worthy of the family name. about the loneliness that came with success. It was the most honest conversation they had ever had, without masks, without defenses, just two people trying to understand each other. And then, without either of them planning it, Marina asked, "Are you afraid of anything, Richard?" He fell silent. He thought about the answer, and then, with a sincerity that surprised him, he said, "I'm afraid of waking up one day and realizing that I built everything wrong. That success means nothing if you're alone. And I'm afraid that when I finally find someone who makes it all worthwhile, I won't be able to keep that person by my side." Marina held the teacup in her hands. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. "And you?" Richard asked. "What are you afraid of?" She took a deep breath. "I'm afraid to trust again, and lose again. I'm afraid that the past will never leave me alone. And I'm afraid that if I let someone in, that person will discover who I really am and leave." Richard reached his hand across the table. He hesitated for a second, and then he touched her hand, softly. "I won't leave." Marina looked at his hand over hers, and she didn't pull back. She stayed there, connected, vulnerable. "You promise?" "I promise." It was at that moment that Richard realized it was no longer attraction, it was no longer curiosity, it was something bigger, something he had never felt before, something that scared him, but at the same time made him feel alive. They returned to their rooms already past 2 in the morning. They stopped in the hallway in front of Marina's door. She held the key in her hand. Richard was a few inches from her. "Good night, Marina." "Good night, Richard." And then, on an impulse neither of them planned, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't dramatic. It was brief, soft, but it was real. More real than anything Richard had ever felt. When they separated, Marina was trembling. Richard, too. "Sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." Richard interrupted her, holding her face in his hands. "Don't apologize. Never apologize for that." And then he kissed her back, this time slower, more intense. And when they separated, they both knew that something had irreversibly changed. Marina entered her room. Richard returned to his, and both spent the night awake trying to understand what had just happened. The next day, on the flight back to New York City, they remained silent most of the time. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of those who know something important has happened and need time to process it. Upon arriving in New York City, Richard accompanied her to her car in the airport parking lot. "Marina." She stopped and looked at him. "What happened yesterday?" "I know," she interrupted him. "It wasn't planned. It was a mistake." Richard felt his chest tighten. "It was a mistake?" Marina averted her gaze. "It was. Because I can't get involved with you, Richard. Not while I'm working on this project. Not while there are things you don't know about me." "Then tell me. Tell me what I need to know." Marina shook her head. "Not yet. Not now." And then she got in her car and drove away, leaving Richard there, alone in the parking lot, feeling that he had just lost something he didn't even know he had. But what he didn't know was that Marina was also fighting against a feeling that shouldn't exist, because she couldn't fall in love with him, not with Richard Allen Sampson, not with the man who, unknowingly, had been part of the past that had destroyed her. And now she was trapped between the work she needed to finish, the secret she needed to protect, and the feeling she could no longer deny. The weeks that followed were tense. Marina avoided being alone with Richard. He tried to respect her space, but it was difficult. Very difficult. Because now he knew what it was like to be near her. He knew the taste of her lips. He knew what it was like to look into her eyes and see something beyond the surface. And he wanted more. He wanted everything. But Marina was determined. She would finish the job, deliver the final report, and leave, before everything fell apart, before the truth came out. Because she knew that when Richard discovered who she really was, everything would change, and she wasn't ready to deal with that. Not yet. The event would take place at the Museum of Modern Art, the iconic MoMA on Fifth Avenue. It was a gala night organized by the American Hotel and Lodging Association, AHLA, bringing together the sector's main executives, national and international investors, authorities, and specialized press. Richard had been invited as one of the main speakers. The theme of his talk, transparency and ethics in business. It was an irony he himself recognized, considering everything he had discovered in recent months about his own company. Marina didn't want to go. She claimed it wasn't part of her duties as a consultant, that social events weren't her area, but the investors from the Swiss fund insisted. They wanted her to be present, to follow the discussions and evaluate Empire Hotel's market positioning. She had no choice. On that Friday night, the New York City sky was clear, which was rare. The city lights sparkled against the dark background, and Fifth Avenue buzzed with the movement of cars and people. MoMA was illuminated, its red pillars creating a dramatic contrast with the glass and concrete around it. Marina arrived alone, by taxi. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but discreet. Nothing to draw attention. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, light makeup. She didn't want to be there, but she was, and she would do what needed to be done. Richard saw her as soon as she entered the main hall. He felt his heart quicken. It had been almost 2 weeks since they had barely spoken beyond strictly professional matters. Since that kiss in Denver, Marina had built a wall between them, and Richard didn't know how to tear it down without disrespecting the boundaries she had set. He approached her. She saw him coming and took a deep breath. "You came?" Marina nodded. "I had no choice. The investors asked me to." Richard wanted to say so. Many things. He wanted to ask why she was avoiding him. He wanted to understand what had happened, but that wasn't the place, it wasn't the time. "You look beautiful." She averted her gaze. "Thank you." An awkward silence settled between them. Finally, Marina said, "How long until your speech?" "In half an hour." "Then you should be preparing." Richard smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I'm already prepared. What I'm not is, well." Marina looked at him finally, and, for a brief moment, the mask fell. He saw in her eyes the same confusion, the same conflict he felt. "Me neither, Richard, but that changes nothing." And then she walked away, disappearing among the groups of guests circulating through the hall. The night ran its course. Cocktails were served, conversations were held, business cards were exchanged. Richard greeted dozens of people, but his mind was elsewhere. It was on Marina, the way she moved through the hall, always on the sidelines, always observing, never fully participating, as if she were a shadow, as if she didn't want to be seen. When it was time for his speech, Richard went up to the small stage set up in the center of the hall. The lights dimmed partially. A spotlight illuminated him. He adjusted the microphone and began to speak. He spoke about the importance of ethics in business, about how the unbridled pursuit of profit could destroy not only companies, but lives, about the responsibility executives had not only to shareholders, but to employees, customers, communities. He spoke with passion, with sincerity, and for the first time in many years, he wasn't just playing a role. He was speaking about something he truly believed in. Marina watched from afar, leaning against one of the museum's columns. And she felt her chest tighten, because everything Richard said was true. But it was also too late for her, too late for what she had lost. At the end of the speech, the applause was warm. Richard descended from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk, ask questions, congratulate him. He tried to be polite, but his eyes searched for Marina until he found her. She was heading for the exit. He excused himself from the person he was speaking with and went after her. He caught up with her in the entrance hall before she reached the door. "Marina, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I need to go. Please, just give me a minute." She finally turned around, and he saw something in her eyes he didn't expect. Tears, held back. But there. "What is it? What did I do?" "You didn't do anything, Richard. That's the problem. You're exactly who I knew you were. But that doesn't make it any easier." "I don't understand." "I know. and maybe it's better that way. She started to walk away again, when a male voice with an Eastern European accent cut through the air. "Marina! Marina Vance!" They both stopped. Marina turned pale. Richard saw the color drain from her face. She turned slowly. A man of about 50, grey-haired, impeccably dressed, approached with a wide smile. "I knew it was you. What an incredible surprise." The man was Dmitry Volkov, a Russian investor who had been doing business in the United States for years. Richard vaguely knew him from previous events, but he didn't understand why Marina was so shaken. Dmitry came close to her and hugged her, even seeing her resistance. "How many years? 5, 6? 7, Marina replied, her voice almost inaudible. "7, that's right. Since the TechStay case. What a sad story, wasn't it? But I always knew you would recover. You were always too strong to be destroyed." Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. TechStay. He knew that name, of course he did. Dmitry continued speaking, oblivious to the tension in the air. "And now you're here, working in the hotel industry again. What a coincidence. Do you remember when your startup was revolutionizing the market? That integrated hotel management system was brilliant. Such a shame what happened with the acquisition. Those American funds were ruthless. But oh well, business is business, isn't it?" Marina didn't respond. She just looked at the floor. Richard felt his heart race. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture that was forming was devastating. Dmitry finally noticed the atmosphere and quickly said goodbye, promising to arrange dinner to catch up. When he left, the silence between Richard and Marina was deafening. "TechStay," Richard said, almost whispering. "You're Marina Vance, the founder of TechStay." She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. Richard ran a hand over his face, trying to process. TechStay had been a promising technology startup for the hospitality sector, founded in Portland about 7 years ago. He vaguely remembered hearing about it at the time. It was a small but innovative company, and then, suddenly, it disappeared from the market. It had been acquired by an American investment fund through an aggressive operation. And yes, he knew this because one of the funds that participated in the acquisition had his capital. It wasn't a direct investment, but he was one of the minority shareholders. "Good heavens," he murmured. "I was there. I was part of it." Marina opened her eyes, and when she looked at him, there was pain, pure, raw. "Not directly, but yes, you were there." She began to walk out of the museum. Richard followed her. They walked out into the cold New York City night. Fifth Avenue was busy. Cars sped past. People walked hurriedly, but the two of them were trapped in a bubble of silence. Tell me everything." Marina stopped on the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, and then she began. "I was 28 when I founded TechStay. It was a small company. My partner and I, who was also my fiancée at the time, we believed we could revolutionize hotel management with accessible technology. We worked day and night. We got some clients. The business was growing. It wasn't big, but it was promising. And then the American funds appeared. They offered an acquisition. It seemed too good to be true, and it was. They didn't want the company. They wanted to eliminate the competition. As soon as they bought it, they dismantled everything, fired everyone, buried the technology, and I was left with nothing, no company, no future, and no fiancé because he couldn't handle the pressure and left me when everything fell apart." Richard felt his throat tighten. "Marina, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." She looked at him with deep sadness. "I know. You were just one investor among many. You probably didn't even know that was happening. But it happened, and it changed my life forever. It took me years to recover, to rebuild my career, to trust myself again, and now I'm here, working for you, for the man who was part of the operation that destroyed everything I built." The words fell like stones. Richard wanted to say something, anything that made sense, but there was nothing, no justification, no excuse. "Why did you accept this job? Why did you come to Empire Hotels?" Marina averted her gaze. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could come back, that I could be in this sector again without breaking down. And because deep down maybe I wanted to understand. to understand how this world that destroyed me works. But what I didn't expect was to meet you. I didn't expect you to be different from what I imagined. Different how? Human, real, capable of changing, capable of being honest, capable of making me feel things I didn't want to feel. Richard took a step towards her. Marina, what happened to Tex Day was a tragedy, and I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry for having been a part of it, even indirectly. But that doesn't erase what exists between us. It doesn't erase what we feel. Marina shook her head, tears now streaming freely down her face. But it also doesn't change the past, Richard. It doesn't change what I lost. It doesn't change the fact that you represent everything that hurt me. So what do we do? Do we just give up? Marina wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know. I really don't know. She hailed a passing taxi. Richard gently held her arm. Please, don't leave like this. Let's talk. Let's find a solution. Marina looked at him one last time. And in that look, Richard saw everything. The pain, the conflict, the love, the fear. I need time, Richard. I need to process all of this. And you do too. How much time? I don't know. And then she got into the taxi and drove away. Richard stood there alone on the Fifth Avenue sidewalk, with the city noise around him, feeling that he had just lost the only person who truly mattered. In the following days, Marina did not appear at the office. She sent a formal email saying she was working remotely to complete the final report. Richard tried to call. He sent messages, but she didn't respond. And he respected that, because he understood, because he knew there were things that needed time to be digested. But time didn't heal everything. And Richard was learning that the hard way. He spent those days investigating, reading everything about Tex Day, about the acquisition, about Marina Vance, and the more he discovered, the worse he felt. Her company really was promising. The technology was innovative, and the operation that destroyed it was calculated, cold, merciless. He found old articles on tech websites, interviews with Marina, still young, full of hope, talking about expansion plans. And then suddenly, silence. The company disappeared. Marina disappeared, as if they had never existed. He also discovered more about her ex-fiancé, Roger Foster, a marketing executive who worked at Tex Day, handsome, charismatic, ambitious. They were the perfect couple, according to the articles of the time, until the company was destroyed, and he abandoned her. He married someone else months later, an heiress to a supermarket chain, and never spoke publicly about Marina again. Richard felt anger, a dull anger, not just at himself, but at the entire system that allowed lives to be destroyed in the name of profit, at the entire corporate world that he had always accepted as normal, as inevitable. It was on a Monday, 10 days after the MoMA event, that Marina finally sent the final report. It was a document of over 100 pages, complete, detailed, impeccable. She did her job to the end, with excellence, as always. At the end of the report, there was a personal note. Richard, my work here is done. Empire Hotels has the potential to be an exemplary company in the sector, but it needs deep structural changes, which are detailed in this document. I strongly recommend that investors proceed with the acquisition, provided the suggested reforms are implemented. As for us, I think it's best we keep our distance, not because you're not a good person, but because the past is too heavy, and I don't know if I can carry it in a relationship. At the same time, I sincerely wish you to continue changing, continue being honest, continue being better. You have that potential. Take care, Marina. Richard read the note 3 times, and on the 3rd time, something inside him broke. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was pure sadness. The realization that he had lost something precious, and that perhaps there was no turning back. But he wasn't going to give up. Not yet. Because Marina had said something important. She said she didn't know if she could. She didn't say she didn't want to. And as long as there was doubt, there was hope. Richard picked up the phone and called his lawyer. He asked for all the details about the acquisition of TextA, who the investors were, who made the decisions, who executed the operation. He wanted to understand every detail, every name, every move. And then, when he had all the information, he would do what needed to be done, even if it meant exposing his own guilt, even if it meant risking his reputation, because there was something more important at stake now, the truth and love. Meanwhile, Marina was in her apartment in the West Village, looking out the window at the illuminated city. She had done the right thing, finished the work, kept her distance, protected her heart. But why then did she feel she had made a mistake? She picked up her cell phone, looked at Richard's unanswered messages, dozens of them, some professional, others personal, some desperate. She wanted to reply. She wanted to say she missed him, that thinking about him hurt, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward together. But she didn't reply, because she was afraid that if she let him in again, the past would come back to haunt her, afraid that what happened to TextA would repeat itself in some way, afraid that she wouldn't be strong enough to handle it all. And then, just as she was about to turn off her phone and try to sleep, she received a notification, a Google alert. Her name was being mentioned on a business news website. She clicked, and her heart stopped. The headline read, "Roger Foster, marketing executive, speaks on business failures and toxic relationships in new interview." Marina read the article, and with each line she felt her anger grow. Roger, the man who had abandoned her at the worst moment of her life, was now giving interviews talking about how to escape unsuccessful professional relationships. And, without directly mentioning her name, he made clear allusions to her. He painted her as an unstable leader, as someone who couldn't handle pressure, as a person who put emotion above reason in business. It was a lie, all lies, but it was there, published, for the world to see. Marina felt her hands tremble, not from fear, from fury, because she had rebuilt her life precisely to avoid this kind of exposure, to prevent the past from staining her name again. And now Roger, for pure convenience and self-promotion, was doing exactly that. She needed to do something. She needed to defend herself. But how? Who would believe her against a successful married man, respected in the market? And then, in the midst of despair, she thought of Richard. He would know what to do. He would have resources. He would have influence. But could she ask for help from him? After everything? Marina spent the night awake, thinking, planning, trying to find a way out, but all doors seemed closed and far. Away in another corner of the city, Richard was also awake, reading, investigating, preparing, unaware that soon he would be called to the most important battle of his life, not for his company, not for his business, but for the woman he loved, and who, without knowing it, was about to need him more than ever. The article about Roger Foster was not confined to just one site. As happens with any scandal involving the American corporate world, especially when there are insinuations about inappropriate behavior and spectacular failures, the story spread. Business blogs republished, corporate gossip sites amplified it. And 3 days after the first publication, Marina's name was already being openly mentioned. She received calls from old colleagues, some offering support, others wanting to confirm details, and some, the worst ones, just curious, wanting to know if the accusations were true, if she really had been an unstable leader, if TextA had failed due to her incompetence, if her relationship with Roger ended because she was, as some sites suggested, emotionally unpredictable. Marina tried to ignore it, tried to keep working, but it was impossible. Every time she opened her laptop, she saw her name somewhere. Every time. She picked up her phone, there was a new notification, and worse, comments started appearing on social media. People who had never met her commenting on who she was, on what she had done, on her supposed flaws. It was on a Thursday, almost 2 weeks after the MoMA event, that the situation finally escalated. One of the country's main economic news portals published an extensive article about TextA. The title was sensationalist. Promising startup sank due to emotional management, say former employees. Marina read the article with trembling hands. There were anonymous testimonies from people who supposedly worked at the company, saying she made impulsive decisions, that she argued with investors, that she didn't know how to separate personal and professional life, all lies, or at the very least, grotesque distortions of reality. But it was there, published, with credibility. She tried to contact the portal. She requested the right to reply, but the response was cold, bureaucratic. They said she could send a letter of clarification, which would be evaluated by the editorial team. No guarantees of publication. Marina felt helplessness take over. It was like reliving everything again. The destruction of TextDay, the feeling of being crushed by forces greater than her, the certainty that no matter how much she fought, the system would always win. She spent that night crying, alone in her apartment, with the lights off, looking at the city outside, wondering if it was worth continuing, if it was worth fighting, or if it would be better to simply disappear, change her name, change her city, start over, somewhere where no one knew her. But then, in the middle of the night, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated but answered. "Marina?" It was Richard's voice, and just hearing that voice broke something inside her. She couldn't hold back. She started to cry, to sob, speechless. "Marina, I saw the articles. I know what's happening. Where are you?" "At home," she managed to say between sobs. "Send me your address. I'm coming over." "Richard, you don't have to. Send me the address, please." She sent it, and 20 minutes later, he was at her apartment door. Marina opened it. He walked in, and without saying anything, he hugged her, tight, as if he wanted to protect her from everything that was happening. Marina allowed herself. For the first time since everything had started, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. She cried on his shoulder, she vented, she told him about the calls, about the comments, about the article, about how she felt exposed, humiliated, destroyed. Richard listened to everything. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to minimize. He just stayed there, present, solid. When she finally calmed down, they sat on the couch. Richard held her hand in his. "Marina, I need you to listen to me. What's happening isn't fair. It's not true, and it's not going to stay this way." She shook her head. "Richard, there's nothing we can do. It's Roger's word against mine, and he has much more influence, much more resources, much more—" He interrupted her. "He has more resources? Then we'll get more resources. He has influence? We'll build a stronger narrative. Marina, I won't let them destroy you again, I won't." She looked into his eyes and saw determination, sincerity, love. "Why are you doing this?" Richard smiled, a sad but honest smile. "Because I love you. And because, for the first time in my life, I have the chance to do something that truly matters, to use everything I've built, all, the influence I have, for something beyond profit, for justice." Marina felt tears return to her eyes, but they were different tears now, not of despair, of hope. "But what if this harms you? What if your reputation is affected?" Richard shrugged. "So be it. Reputation can be rebuilt, but leaving you alone in this? I can't live with that." They were silent for a moment, and then Marina asked, "What do you have in mind?" Richard took a deep breath. "I'm going to call a press conference. I'm going to talk about TextDay, about the operation that destroyed the company, about my participation, even if indirect. I'm going to expose everything, and I'm going to make it clear that you were not to blame, that you were the victim, and I'm going to use all my platform to ensure the truth is heard." Marina's eyes widened. "Richard, you can't do that. That will—" "It will cost me, I know, but I don't care. Marina, you changed my life. You made me see things in a way I never saw before. You made me want to be better, and now it's my turn to do something for you." "But your company—" "It will survive or it won't. Either way, I'd rather risk the company than lose you." Marina didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like this for her. No one had ever risked so much. No one had ever chosen her above everything else. "Are you sure?" Richard held her face in his hands. "Absolutely." And then he kissed her. And this time, there was no doubt, no fear, only certainty, only love. In the following days, Richard worked tirelessly. He spoke with lawyers, with crisis communication specialists, with trusted journalists. He prepared every detail of the press conference, and throughout that time, Marina stayed by his side, helping, correcting, contributing. They spent hours together, reviewing documents, discussing strategies, and, in between, they talked about everything, about the past, about the future, about what they wanted to build together. Marina told him about the dreams she had for TextDay, about how she wanted to revolutionize the hospitality sector by making technology accessible to small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, about how she believed that innovation should not be the privilege of only the big players. Richard listened, and then he said, "What if we rebuild this? After all this passes, we create a new company, with the right values, with transparency, with purpose." Marina smiled. "You would do that?" "I would do anything with you." And so it was decided. No matter what happened at the press conference, no matter how the market reacted, they would move forward together and build something new, something better. The press conference was scheduled for a Monday in the auditorium of Empire Hotel's headquarters. Richard invited all the major media outlets, newspapers, magazines, portals, TV channels, and everyone accepted, because a hastily called press conference by the CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in the country certainly had something important to announce. On Sunday night, the eve of the press conference, Marina couldn't sleep. She was nervous, afraid, hopeful, all at the same time. Richard stayed with her. They ordered Japanese food. They watched a movie. But neither of them paid attention. Their minds were on the next day. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marina asked for the 10th time, and Richard replied, for the 10th time, "Absolutely sure." They slept together that night, not out of passion, but out of necessity, out of needing each other's presence, out of knowing that the next day would change everything. When morning broke, New York City was cloudy. The heavy clouds promised rain. Richard woke up early, made coffee, and they drank it together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. At 8 in the morning, they arrived at Empire Hotel's headquarters. The auditorium was already being prepared, cameras being set up, microphones being tested, journalists arriving. The atmosphere was one of expectation. Marina stayed backstage. Richard asked her to stay there until the right moment. She agreed, but she was trembling. He held her hands. "It will work out." "What if it doesn't?" He smiled. "Then we'll start over, together." At 9 sharp, the press conference began. Richard went up to the stage. The lights came on, the cameras started recording, and he began to speak. "Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I called you here today because I need to talk about something that has been in the news in recent weeks. And because I need, above all, to tell the truth." He paused. He took a deep breath and continued. 7 years ago, a startup called TextDay was acquired by an American investment fund in an operation that, at the time, seemed like a success. But it wasn't. It was a calculated destruction. The company was bought not to be developed, but to be eliminated. And I was part of it. Not directly, but as a minority investor in one of the funds involved, I contributed financially to that operation. And for years I didn't think about it. I didn't care. Because for me they were just numbers. Just business. But they weren't. They were lives. They were dreams. They were people. The auditorium was in absolute silence, everyone listening. The founder of TextDay was a brilliant engineer named Marina Vance. She created innovative technology. She believed in a better future for the sector. And she was destroyed. Not by incompetence, not by instability, but by a system that values profit above people. And in recent days you have seen articles trying to tarnish her reputation, saying she failed, that she was problematic. And I am here to say that this is a lie. Pure lie. He looked directly at the cameras. Marina Vance did not fail. We failed her. I failed her. And now I am here to take responsibility, to apologize, publicly, and to make it clear that she deserves respect, she deserves recognition, and she deserves justice. There was a murmur in the auditorium. Journalists furiously taking notes, cameras focusing on Richard's every expression. But that's not all I came to say here today. I also came to announce my resignation as CEO of Empire Hotels. A shocked silence filled the auditorium. Even the most experienced journalists seemed surprised. I built this company. I transformed it into what it is today. But I also made mistakes. I valued growth above ethics. I valued results above people. And that needs to change. Empire Hotels needs new leadership. Leadership that understands that business is not just about profit. It's about impact. It's about responsibility. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it costs a lot. He paused again. And that leadership is not me, not now. But I know who it can be. And that's why, before I leave, I want to make a formal recommendation to the board and shareholders. I want to nominate Marina Vance to take over as the company's Director of Innovation and Strategy. She has the vision, she has the competence, and, above all, she has the integrity that this company needs. And then Richard turned to the backstage and extended his hand. Marina, come here. Marina, who had been watching everything from behind the curtains, was paralyzed for a second. She didn't expect this, she didn't expect to be called, but then she saw Richard's gaze, and she saw that he was serious, that he was truly doing this for her, for them, for a better future. She took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. When she appeared, there was a new murmur. Flashes went off. Cameras focused on her. And she, for the first time in 7 years, didn't hide. She didn't look away. She stood there, firm. Richard pulled her close to him, and then, before everyone, he said, "This is Marina Vance, and she is not what they tried to make you believe. She is one of the most brilliant minds I have ever met. She is the reason why Empire Hotels still has a future, and she is the woman I love." The auditorium erupted, journalists shouting questions, blinding flashes. But Richard and Marina remained there, together, united. And then Richard opened the floor for questions, and there were many, about his resignation, about Marina, about the past, about the future. He answered everything, with honesty, with transparency, without trying to protect himself. Marina also answered some questions, about Tech's Day, about what happened, about how she felt now, and she spoke with the same firmness as always, with the same clarity, but now with something more. Hope. The press conference lasted almost 2 hours. When it ended, Richard and Marina left the stage together, exhausted, relieved, uncertain about the future, but certain that they had done the right thing. Backstage, they hugged. And Marina whispered, "Thank you." Richard pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You don't need to thank me. We're in this together, forever." And then they exited through the back door of the building, avoiding the crowd of journalists still waiting outside. They got into Richard's car and drove away, with no specific destination, just wanting to get away for a while, to process everything that had happened. They drove through the city without haste. They passed Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, Central Park. And then, as the sun began to set, they stopped at a viewpoint on the Brooklyn Heights promenade. From there they could see the entire city, the illuminated skyline, the lights beginning to come on. New York City pulsing as always. Marina leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. "What's going to happen now?" Richard shrugged. "I don't know. I'll probably be crucified by some, praised by others. The company will go through a crisis. Shareholders will be furious. But honestly, I don't care." Marina smiled. "You really have changed, haven't you?" Richard smiled back. "You changed me." They stayed there for hours, talking, planning, dreaming. They talked about the new company they would create, about the values that would guide them, about how they would do things differently, about how they would learn from past mistakes and build something better. And for the first time since they met, both felt peace. The certainty that, no matter what tomorrow brought, they would be together. And that together they could face anything. When they returned to Marina's apartment, it was late at night. They ordered pizza. They watched the evening news, where the press conference was the main topic. Opinions were divided. Some praised Richard's courage, others criticized him for exposing the company. Some defended Marina, others still questioned her capabilities. But none of that mattered anymore because they knew the truth, and they knew that with time the truth always prevails. That night, lying together, Marina asked, "Are you afraid of what's ahead?" Richard thought for a moment. "I am. But it's a different kind of fear. It's not the fear of losing. It's the fear of not being up to the task, of not being able to build what we promised." Marina held his hand. "We will succeed. Together." Richard smiled in the dark. Together. And then, exhausted, emotionally drained but at peace, they slept, knowing that the worst was over and that the best was yet to come. The weeks following the press conference were, without a doubt, the most turbulent of Richard Allen Sampson's life. As he had predicted, the reaction was divided. Half the market treated him as a hero of corporate transparency. The other half saw him as a traitor who exposed his own company for personal reasons. Empire Hotel's shareholders panicked. Some demanded emergency meetings, others threatened lawsuits, and there were even those who tried to force an immediate dismissal of the board. But there was also support, surprising and unexpected support. Company, employees, especially those lower in the hierarchy, sent messages of gratitude, saying they finally saw humanity in leadership. Customers praised his courage. Small business owners in the hospitality sector, who had always seen Empire as a predatory threat, expressed respect. And young entrepreneurs began to cite Richard as an example of ethical leadership in an often corrupt corporate world. Marina, in turn, saw her reputation rebuilt almost overnight. The same outlets that published defamatory articles now rushed to portray her in a different light. Articles emerged telling the true story of TechStay. Interviews were requested, and little by little, the name Marina Vance ceased to be associated with failure and came to symbolize resilience. Roger Foster, the ex-fiancé, tried to defend himself on social media. He published notes saying he had been misunderstood, that he never intended to harm Marina, but it was too late. Public opinion had already chosen its side, and it wasn't his. His own company removed him from leadership positions, claiming they needed to preserve the institutional image. He tried to sue some portals for defamation, but lawyers recommended he simply let the matter die, and that's what he did. He disappeared, returned to the silence, from which he should never have emerged. As for Empire Hotels, the board accepted Richard's resignation, but surprisingly, they also approved his nomination of Marina for the Director of Innovation and Strategy. The investors from the Swiss fund, who had closely followed the entire process, were her biggest defenders. They stated that Marina was exactly the kind of leadership the market needed, someone with vision, competence, and, above all, integrity. Marina accepted the position, but made it clear that it would be temporary, only until the company stabilized, because her plans now were different, bigger, and involved Richard. 3 months. After the press conference on a sunny October afternoon, Richard and Marina met at a discreet cafe in Greenwich Village. They had agreed to discuss plans for the new company. But when they sat at the table and ordered coffee, they realized they didn't want to talk about business. They just wanted to be together, to enjoy that moment, to breathe. "You know everyone thinks we went crazy, right?" Marina said with a smile. Richard laughed. "Let them think. We've always been a little crazy anyway." "A little?" He smiled, and then became serious. "Marina, I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked at him, curious. "Are you happy? Truly happy?" Marina thought for a moment, and then replied, "I am. For the first time in a long time I am, and it's scary, because I don't know if I deserve it." Richard held her hand across the table. You deserve everything, all the good that can exist, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Marina felt her eyes well up, but they were good tears, of gratitude, of love. "Then it's a deal. We build this together. The company, our life, everything." Richard smiled. Everything. And that's how New Era Hospitality was born. Not in a boardroom, not in a corporate office, but in a simple cafe, between two people who believed it was possible to do things differently, to do better. They rented a small space in the Greenwich Village neighborhood. Nothing luxurious, just functional. They assembled a lean team, people who shared the same values, who believed in accessible innovation, in technology as a tool for inclusion, not exclusion, and above all in ethics as the foundation of any sustainable business. The New Era concept was simple, yet revolutionary. To develop technological solutions for small and medium-sized hotels, inns, and hostels that couldn't afford expensive systems, to democratize hotel management, to make operational excellence accessible to everyone, not just the big market players. It was exactly what Marina had always wanted to do with TechStay. And now, 7 years later, with more experience, more maturity, and a partner who believed in her unconditionally, she finally had the chance to realize that dream. The first few months were difficult. Money was scarce, clients were few, and there were times when both doubted if they would succeed. But every time doubt appeared, they remembered why they were doing it, and they continued. Richard discovered in those months something he had never imagined. He discovered that he was happier working in a small office with a united team than he had ever been commanding an empire. He discovered that leadership was not about power. It was about serving. It was about creating an environment where people could grow, innovate, make mistakes, and learn. And he discovered that the most gratifying success was not what brought public recognition, but what brought inner peace. Marina, in turn, realized that she was finally making peace with her past. Every line of code they wrote, every client they won, every small victory of New Era was a way to rewrite the history of TechStay. Not erasing what happened, but re-signifying it, transforming pain into purpose, transforming loss into learning. It was on a December night while working late in the office that Marina stopped typing and looked at Richard, who was concentrated on reviewing a contract. "Richard," he looked up. "Yes?" "I need to tell you something." Her tone of voice was serious. He closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "I love you." They were simple words, but it was the first time she had said them openly, without fear, without reservations. Richard smiled, a huge, genuine smile. "I love you too, and I think you already knew that." She smiled back. "I did, but I needed to say it. I needed you to know that I'm no longer afraid, that I trust you, that I trust us." Richard stood up, walked over to her, and pulled her into a tight hug. "I promise I will do everything to be worthy of that trust. Every day for the rest of my life." And then they kissed, there in the middle of the messy office with papers scattered, computers on, and the air conditioning humming. It wasn't a romantic setting, but it was real, and it was theirs. Months turned into a year. A New Era began to grow. Slowly but sustainably, they acquired 50 clients, then 100, then 200. Small hotels in towns in rural New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, inns on the coast, hostels in major cities. And each of these clients was treated not as a number but as a partner. The press began to notice. Articles emerged praising the business model, social innovation awards were received, and Richard and Marina became references in a new type of entrepreneurship, one that valued impact as much as profit. Empire Hotels, under new leadership, also transformed. Marina fulfilled her temporary one-year commitment and left a solid innovation structure. The company adopted many of the principles she had proposed, and, surprisingly, it prospered. It proved that ethics and profit were not mutually exclusive. It was on a May morning, almost 2 years after the press conference, that Richard and Marina met at The same viewpoint on the Brooklyn Heights promenade where they had been on that turbulent night. The city was different, or perhaps it was they who were different, lighter, happier, more complete. "Do you regret anything?" Marina asked, looking at the horizon. Richard thought, "I regret not having done this sooner, for taking so long to understand what truly matters. But regret what we did? Never." Marina leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me neither. It was difficult. It was painful. But it was worth it." Richard turned to her. He took a small box from his pocket. Marina's heart stopped. "I know we've been through so much, and I know that in the end what matters is being together, but I wanted to do this the right way, the way you deserve." He opened the box. Inside there was a simple, elegant, discreet ring, exactly Marina's style. "Marry me? Not because it's expected, not because it's romantic, but because I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, building, making mistakes, getting it right, but always together." Marina had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He placed the ring on her finger, and they kissed. There, with New York City as their witness, the city that saw them meet, that saw them fight, that saw them separate, and that now saw them truly unite. The wedding took place 3 months later in a small, intimate ceremony at an inn in rural New York that was a client of New Era. Only close friends and family, nothing ostentatious, nothing to impress, just love, just truth. During the ceremony, Marina read a letter she had written to Richard. "You found me when I was broken, and instead of trying to fix me, you showed me that I was never broken, just hurt, and hurts heal. You taught me that it's possible to start over, that the past doesn't define who we are, that the future is built every day with choices, with courage, with love. And I promise to be by your side, in good days and bad days, in successes and failures, because what matters is not where we arrive, but who we are on the way, and I want to be with you, always." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Not even Richard could hold back his tears, and then he read his own letter. "I spent my whole life believing that success was about accumulating companies, money, recognition, but you taught me that success is about stripping away the masks, stripping away the ego, stripping away everything that isn't essential. And when I did that, when I took away everything superficial, I found you, and I found myself. You saved me, Marina. Not because you solved my problems, but because you showed me that I had the strength to solve them myself. And now I promise to use that strength to support you, to defend you, to love you every day without exception, without condition." They exchanged rings, they kissed, and they officially began a new life. The following years were years of growth. New Era expanded, opened offices in other cities, developed new products, gained investments from social impact funds. But it never lost its essence. It never compromised its values. And Richard and Marina never ceased to be the same. Accessible, humble, focused on making a difference. They had children. 2, a boy and a girl. And they raised these children with the same values that guided their businesses. Honesty, empathy, the courage to do the right thing even when it's difficult. Marina returned to giving talks, but now not as an anonymous consultant, as herself, telling her story, inspiring other people who had also been destroyed by the system to rebuild their lives, not to give up, to believe that it is indeed possible to win, but on their own time and on their own terms. Richard also became an active voice, not defending the ruthless capitalism he once practiced, but a new model, a model where companies exist not just to enrich shareholders, but to improve the world, where profit is a consequence of impact, not the ultimate goal. And Textay, that name that once represented pain, it became a symbol. New Era officially acquired the rights to the brand and original technology, and launched a line of products called Textay Legacy, a tribute to what was, a promise of what would be. One night, 10 years after that first meeting at Empire Hotels, Richard and Marina were at home, in the living room, with their children already asleep. They were reviewing presentations for a conference the next day, but they stopped and just looked at each other. "Are you happy?" Richard asked. Marina smiled. "Very, and you?" "More than I imagined possible." They were silent for a moment, and then Marina said, "You know what I love most about all this?" "What?" "That we didn't have to be perfect. We made mistakes. We got hurt. We doubted, but we kept going. And that for me is the greatest success of all." Richard agreed. "You're right. And you know what I learned?" She waited. "That true power isn't in never falling. It's in choosing to get up, in choosing to try again, in choosing to love even when it hurts, in choosing to be better even when the world says you don't need to. You taught me that, and I will be forever grateful." Marina leaned in and kissed him, softly, tenderly, with love that came from years of building, of choices, of commitment. And so, in the simplicity of that room, with the city outside continuing its frantic pace, two people who had once been broken, lost, alone, were now whole, together, at peace. Because in the end, Richard and Marina's story wasn't about business success. It wasn't about public redemption. It wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about something much simpler and much deeper. It was about two imperfect people who chose to love despite the scars, who chose to build despite the ruins, who chose to believe despite all reasons to give up. And that choice, repeated every day, in small gestures, in honest conversations, in tight hugs, in shared tears, in genuine laughter, was what made it all worthwhile. The man who once conquered everything with charm learned that true power lies in humility, in vulnerability, in service. And the woman who was deemed inadequate by the world discovered that her strength had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to blossom. They didn't change the world, but they changed their world, and in doing so, inspired others to do the same. And perhaps that is the greatest revolution possible. Not the one that happens in the headlines, but the one that happens in the heart of every person who chooses, despite everything, to keep believing. New York City continued to pulse outside, relentless, chaotic, intense. But inside that home, there was peace, there was love, there was a future. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Dear listeners, we hope Richard and Marina's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by the journey of rebuilding true love and the courage to start anew, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what most resonated with you in this story. What was the moment that moved you the most? Have you ever experienced a similar situation? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's possible to reinvent oneself, proving that true love exists and that redemption is always possible. Your participation is very important to us. We await you in the next episode with another story that will touch your heart and make you believe that it's always worth fighting for your dreams and for those you love. Until next time.